Hi, I'm Erikka Askeland, news editor of Energy Voice, and I'm here today with a special edition of Energy Voice Out Loud for International Women's Day. I have Nicola Welsh and Linda Stewart from Fugro, who are here to tell us how their dogged determination and ability to hang on to their sense of confidence has brought them to where they are today. So I'm so delighted that you have decided to join me. I'll introduce you first a little bit, but then I want you to tell us a little bit about what's going on and why you're here. So Nicola Welsh, you're the UK country director for Fugro. You have a rather distinguished career. You've also worked for Boeing, Rio Tinto, Harvard Business School, Cornell. Welcome. Thank you. So wonderful to see you. And then, of course, we have Linda Stewart. And you're the director of Marine Geophysical Europe, Fugro. Yeah. And you also have a very distinguished career because you've been at Fugro all of your career, 18 years.
Since university, yeah.
Absolutely. And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We're here because of International Women's Day. International Women's Day, actually, I was looking at their themes this year, and it accelerate action. But I think also, kind of maybe one of the big themes of International Women's Day is just celebrating female achievements. And, we're also here because, this is part of our series, Women in New Energy, is something that we really focus on at Energy Voice and is really important to us. We have a big event coming up, and I hope you both are going to be there. But maybe tell me a little bit about yourself, your journey with Fugro, and maybe a little bit of something about women in the industry and what that's all about. Yeah,
thank you.
You can start.
I started. I've been in Fugro for 19 years. I started as a trainee surveyor. I spent about 10 years of my career offshore, so trainee surveyor, senior surveyor, and a few leadership roles offshore as well. And then, after 10 years, decided that offshore is a lifestyle choice. So I decided it was time to sort of move into the office environment. So took up a few technical roles in operational support, and then moved to project management. And then, about 4 years ago, I took up the service line director role.
Now, you were saying when we were discussing earlier that you're the first woman in that senior role in Aberdeen or Scotland?
Yeah,
in
Aberdeen.
Yeah.
So the first female to take the service line lead role in Aberdeen for geophysics. I'll be honest. I actually had a few doubts about applying for the role at the time because I didn't quite tick all the boxes on the job description. But I guess I've a really strong technical and operational background, and sometimes you just got to back yourself. And it really is about the team that you have as well. So, those knowledge gaps, it's leveraging your team to kind of help you along the way. And we've a really strong team in Aberdeen, and we really buy into our purpose as Fugro is just to create a safe and livable world. And I'll always say, what we do matters. So having that combined purpose, and it's been a real privilege to lead the service line. And, reflecting on the last 4 years, I guess it's making sure each of the team members has what they need to succeed, because ultimately that will lead to a successful service line, and we are.
Well, that's a generous approach and an approach to leadership, which I think we'll probably hopefully touch on as we carry on discussing. I remember 18 years ago, and I don't think there were probably a lot of women offshore back then, were there?
No, it's a very male-dominated environment, and I think throughout the entire 10 years that I did spend in the field, a lot of the time you were the only woman on the crew. But I would say it was overwhelmingly a positive experience. You really come together as a team, and you're really invested in making a success of the project, and you actually end up spending more time with your team members than you do with family and friends. So there is quite a close-knit bond. But I think there's also been challenging times as well. If you're the only woman on a vessel. So if I kind of look at it in two areas, it's probably broken into first one being undesirable behaviour through banter gone wrong. So wrong terminology, jokes that are inappropriate. And then the other one would be a cultural difference as well. I've experienced that in other parts of the world.
Now, tell us a little bit about your journey. How long have you been at Fugro, and what, how did that all look?
I've been at Fugro for a whopping 7 months.
7 months?
Yes.
Oh, well, welcome.
So I think my career has spanned many, many industries. So I started out in shipping as well, but a little bit plusher maybe than Linda's world, so in the cruise line industry. Moved very quickly into supply chain. And spent most of my formative years in supply chain, working in the mining industry, working in fast-moving consumable goods, so multiple industries there, and then pivoting into senior management executive positions at Boeing in the United Kingdom, and then now, of course, at Fugro. So, aerospace, mining, hospitality, fast-moving consumable goods, big industries, very fast-paced, but lots of exposure, and very male-dominated in most of those. Right?
I was going to say, mining and aerospace in particular are probably, and offshore marine are probably quite male-dominated.
Yeah.
So well done. That's, what does it take to navigate that, do you think? Speaking of marine. Yeah.
Well, I think I was fairly lucky in a way, because my father was in the Navy, my stepfather. So I was very used to being sort of the only female on a military base, or, so I didn't feel uncomfortable working in male-dominated environments because I was used to kind of being mostly around male environments. But it does take an awareness and an understanding. So I think for the first 15 years of my career, there's no difference, so don't treat me any differently. I don't want to talk about it. Like, I'm here to get the job done. I want to be praised for the job that I do. And then it took one or two female leaders to sort of pivot my attention to, well, hang on a second, are you being mindful about how you're progressing, or are you just getting stuck in to the job that you're doing in order to progress, and are you progressing as fast as you think that you should? So Sheryl Sandberg's got a great book, Lean In, right, which really talks about, are you at the table, and if you've got a seat at the table, are you leaning in, or are you choosing, like many women will do, they will choose to sit on the chairs on the outside of the boardroom, and not actually sit in the chairs right next to the CEO or something. So, have a little look about, are you leaning in, or are you just working really hard? And I think with a few pushes that way, and then I started to study a little bit, like at Cornell, you start to realize how the deck of cards is stacked really against women from a cultural perspective. And it's not intentional. It's not on purpose. It just sort of is, right? So there's something called the double bind. So the double bind is where it doesn't, so you can rock up, it's a conflict, right? So a woman can be very caring, and then they go, oh, well, she's really maternal, she's too soft, right? But if a man is very caring, it's, oh, isn't he so emotionally intelligent and in touch with his feelings? Or a woman can be assertive, and then it's, oh, look, she's a hard-ass woman, isn't she? Excuse my language there.
I think we're okay with
that's what happens
women,
when you bring the Australian in the room. But she's very, she's going to be negative, and she's going to have negative attributes in that leadership style. Whereas if a man shows those attributes, it's forceful and it's leadership, and it's, oh, isn't he a strong leader? And so it's celebrated in one, and on the other, there's confusion and conflict. And so for a woman to navigate in that environment, you really do need to be aware that people are raised in those perceptions. So if you think a young man, a little boy, he might be encouraged to go and climb trees, or he might be encouraged to do courageous events. Go jump in that stream, haha, I'll hook you out. Whereas the girl may end up supporting mum in the kitchen, or she follows what mum does. Females can be coached at very young ages into being more collaborative, and how do we create harmony, and all those, sorts of awareness points, whereas boys may be, and of course I'm speaking in generalities, of course, but boys may be encouraged instead to be a bit more courageous and to be out there and to speak out. So that's what the expected behavior is from a cultural perspective. So once, of course, you crank that up 30 years later, what do you see in the workplace? Well, you see people struggling with, well, I have a stereotype of this sort of person, and of what a woman might do in these situations, and there's negative attributes or conflict, right, with that.
Yeah,
so it's very interesting.
It's fascinating stuff, isn't it? And my mind always just goes to the, why, and how do these perceptions grow? But actually, you've just really identified I think, you know, how so much of it is cultural.
But if you think about the journey of International Women's Day, though, right? Like at first it brought attention, right? It brought it into the conversation. So now it's not International Women's Day with, you know, sort of negative connotations to it, or surprise, or, you know, whatever you want to, sticker shock, whatever you want to say. It's okay, now today's International Women's Day. So there's a mindfulness that the day brought, which was really important. But I feel the theme of accelerating action is really talking about, it's going to take 5 more generations of women, right, to have gender pay equity. So it's a very long time in the future, if we continue just being mindful and tweaking. And so it really is then about encouraging leaders now, from my perspective, to say, okay, well, now you're aware, now you're mindful, but now you need to turn inwards and actually decide, where can I change? Why is it, if I look around at my team and honestly assess and say, goodness, most of my team is middle class, white males, for example, why is that? And I'm quite certain they would have been the most qualified person in the interview, out of the interview base. You know, there will be perfectly reasonable reasons for why the team is what the team is. The issue is, though, that then you get a very similar voice in that team. So you get groupthink really easily. You know, you're not introducing diversity and inclusion into that group. Which is why you then need to look and go, okay, well, what are the stream-ins? You know, how is my job ad phrased? Is it phrased in a way that actually I'm encouraging men, right, to apply? And there's lots of great artificial intelligence tools that you can look at, etc. Or why is it that my team dynamic is all women, perhaps? So I used to have that in a different job, that actually we were 85% women and only 15% men. And then it was, well, hang on a second, we need to rebalance it the other way, right? So what is it that we're doing that is encouraging sort of one gender over another? So it is just about saying, okay, well, while I'm looking and trying to promote and build gender equity within my organization, how am I pulling the talent in? How am I phrasing the job ads? How am I reviewing the CVs, right? Am I looking at a CV and thinking, well, if you don't have 5-year blocks with each position and you don't slowly but surely grow, like if you listen to Linda's story, you know, she's got a very brilliant story of how she stretched into all of these spaces and slowly but surely moved up into the organization. But for others, it may be that they were pulled back as carers, or maybe they had maternity leave, or maybe they needed, I don't know, to stop for 6 months and, you know, relocate because their partner needed to relocate. But there's all sorts of different reasons as to why that sort of block, right, doesn't naturally progress. And there is a tendency that it's more for women than it is for men, that you will see that disparity in the CV. And so not discounting it, but choosing to sort of say, okay, well, maybe there's a conversation here around why that looks, or why all of a sudden did you start working as a part-time receptionist at the local school for 3 years? That doesn't make any sense. Whereas before you were a lawyer at a major law firm, and this is, well, I did that because my kids, I could drop them off and put them in, those sorts of things. So it's just about being curious and being mindful about what you can naturally do to sort of accelerate.
Maybe tell us a little bit about how you decided to push through when you, decided to come back offshore and go take that more senior role. Is that something you're able to talk about?
Yeah, I guess it's an element of career progression as well, and there was the opportunity, so the position opened up. And as I said, I had my doubts because I didn't quite tick all those boxes. But I think when I reflect back, it was that, you know, it's the opportunities there. I might as well go for it and see what happens. And I think sometimes a lot of women don't even get to that position where they feel comfortable to even just go for the opportunity. They kind of look at that job advert and go, yeah, I don't quite have the confidence. And I guess for me, moving into that leadership position, then I actually feel it's a bit of an added responsibility of me on the role to share my journey, because, you know, all organisations struggle with getting women into leadership positions, and representation matters. So if you can see it, you can be it. So for me, sharing my personal journey of starting as a trainee, we all start as trainees somewhere, and kind of moving up through the ranks, sharing your experiences, sharing the challenges, sharing how you've overcome those challenges. It just makes it more relatable. And I think sharing those stories just maybe might help women think, well, actually, I've listened to that journey, I've got a similar path, I might just go for that position.
Sure. And are you promoting STEM outside or within the organization, and focusing on women and girls in that area, just out of curiosity? Or?
Yeah, we have quite a few STEM projects. So to be honest with you, we could probably have a separate podcast on the skills shortage within the industry.
Ooh, right.
But
we'll do that next.
But really for us, there's a target audience across. Really for us, it's starting. You've got to start at primary school age, because of the shortage. You do need all genders to sort of embrace STEM subjects. So, I have one of my team actually goes out to our local schools in the area with an offshore wind sort of presentation, and he gets kids to build wind turbines, and it's just to kind of spark that sort of thought process young at that age, because they are the next generation that kind of come up through. We do have, bring your children to work day as well, and I think having a lot of women in the team as well, we try and encourage them to bring their kids to see the vessels, to see our remote operations centre. So it's just about trying to plant that seed. So I guess specifically targeting girls and young women. I actually think you need to target all genders.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, good. How are you finding work in the Remote Operations Centre?
Well, I guess there's two ways of looking at it for Fugro. If we take remote operations and our remote operations centre, so that's really about managing live marine operations. So that does take place in our sort of local centre here in Aberdeen. And what that does is it provides just additional opportunities for women and men who've been offshore in their career. They get to a point where they make a life choice to start a family or look after loved ones, or for whatever reason they need to give up that offshore career. And then without remote operations, there's less sort of pathways for continuing that technical discipline. But remote operations allows you to continue that technical path. If you take a surveyor, for example, offshore, you're the hub of acquisition, you're the key focal point for communication between the officers and your engineers deploying equipment on the back deck. You manage the survey plan as well. You now have the opportunity to follow that career path into the remote operations centre and perform that role in live marine operations, when that might be with new technology like our uncrewed surface vessels or our conventional fleet. So it's remote operations is providing that additional career path for technical disciplines.
Yeah. Just it's so nice to have that flexibility, and it's crazy what the technology is doing. If only we had that 20 years ago.
Yeah. You get to go home at night, see your family and friends, and it's still on a rotation basis as well. So you do your shift, and then you have your time off afterwards, like you would in an offshore environment.
That's very good. We are going to take just a very quick break and come back to discuss more about this fascinating subject area for International Women's Day. Give us 2 ticks, we'll be right back.
Join Energy Voice for its biggest Women in New Energy event yet. Taking place on June 19th at the P&J Live in Aberdeen, we've got a full day of sessions and workshops lined up, bringing together a diverse room of pioneers, professionals and advocates from across the energy sector. This event is a unique opportunity to connect, share and learn from some of the most influential voices in the sector on their technical expertise, and to feel inspired by their personal stories. Tickets are being released on the 31st of March, so look out for more information by signing up to the Energy Voice newsletter.
And we're back. I was thinking a little bit about what we had been talking about with particularly the double bind. And one of the things that, Nicola, you had discussed about that double bind is, again, kind of going back to this, do women push? Do they think that they're good enough? And you had this amazing number about, how women kind of like don't feel that they have those credentials when men do. Yeah.
So I think that Linda's example is perfect for it, right? As she considered whether or not she would apply for that job. But the women have a tendency, if they're not 120% plus qualified,
yes,
right, for the job, they won't go for it. Whereas if men are 75% qualified, they'll give it a punt, right? Because for them, the way that so I'm grouping an entire grouping of men, so I have to keep that. But the way that the stereotype can lean towards is that if they don't win it, it's fine, right? So it's processed in a way of, okay, I've chalked that up as an experience, I'll now crack on and try somewhere else, and it's not really internalized, whereas women attach emotion to feedback and failure. So with that, if they don't feel, like truly genuinely feel that they're 120% qualified, if they don't make it, then that means so much more to them, and it's taken so much more seriously, and so therefore they choose not to lean in until they know that they'll be successful. Which is why I think Linda's leadership style, the inclusive leadership style becomes really important, because you have to be able to have your teams feel psychologically safe, to have that conversation to say, oh, do you think, what do you think? You know, the feedback loop has to be consistent and pragmatic. And the only way for the feedback loop to encourage people along a pathway that they may feel insecure is for there to be trust, right? Or psychological safety. And the way to do that, you have to have emotional intelligence. And this is where female leaders now, like if you look at Jacinda Ardern, so she's done a great amount of work in the leadership space of female leaders throughout COVID anyway, she did.
Yeah, former president or no, Prime Minister of New Zealand.
That's right. Yeah. But she was, you know, a new mother that chose to take the position on. But behind the scenes though, the people pushing her profile, she probably had twice as many people in the background pushing her profile than a male leader would. So it's super interesting to dig into the background of it. But it's creating that emotional intelligence to connect with people and to understand who and how your team member ticks, which then can help you be successful. And she was able to do that as Prime Minister, of being a mother and a child. And so she introduced a lot more emotion into how and into her rhetoric and feeling and engagement in that style, which is what resounded so much for many with her leadership style. I'm not going to get into Kiwi politics here, but it's the same as female leaders in business. If you've got the emotional intelligence, then you can encourage them along. But if women specifically don't feel particularly safe, then they won't have the conversation to be able to then decide, yes, I'm going to go for that, and it's okay if I don't get it, right? So there'll be feedback from that will advance me if I'm not successful, but not to just choose not to try at all, which can be an issue.
So there's a lot a workplace or a manager of women can do to bring on, that generation, that leadership. But one of the things I was thinking might be useful to discuss also is female leadership or, inclusive leadership. And is that female leadership? You were actually talking, Linda, about how you, like to focus on inclusivity, with your team. You're the leader now.
Yeah, I suppose, I probably have adopted a bit of a different style to sort of male leaders I've worked under the past. I really do try and make sure that the entire team is engaged. And actually for me, it's making sure that they know that I trust them to go and manage their respective areas. And and giving them the freedom and the space to do that, and it actually includes people who are quite new, maybe into a people management role as well. So it's giving that space to maybe make the mistakes, and then what I feel I get in return is people come to you for advice, and they want to talk through whatever challenges they're facing, and then that's where I would use my experience to sort of give them a little bit of a guidance, not give them the answer, but just give them a little bit of guidance and help them maybe think in a different direction. I think that's probably the difference that I would maybe bring to what I've maybe experienced in the past versus male leadership.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And then, you've been thinking about inclusive leadership. How does that fit into the International Women's Day theme?
So for me, I still think International Women's Day is for all genders. So it doesn't male or women. And so it's about, again, bringing awareness to your own style. And does your own style actually promote gender equity or not? And inclusive leadership is the way to get people feeling, as I've said, psychologically safe, right? In order to sort of try to grow and progress. I think I've worked for men that are brilliant inclusive leaders. I've worked for women. I've worked for authoritarian female leaders, and I've worked for authoritarian male. So there's a whole bag out there. I don't know if you can really, attribute one to a gender or not. But what it does come down to for me is the lens that the leaders grow up with as to how they see the way that the world is, right? And that's where we need to just be super careful. They can be the nicest, kindest, most inclusive leader ever, but if they genuinely believe that, that you've got small children and therefore the only jobs that you can do are X, Y, and Z, then there's a concern for that person if they don't agree with that point of view. So for me, it's more around inclusive leadership is important, but the feedback loop behind it, the leaders have to be prepared to learn, right? Just as much as the employees have to be prepared to receive, because they both have a message to teach one another. So the loop is just extremely important, because you have to be prepared to challenge your own concept of what you think normal is, because that might not be the same as somebody else's. And that's where International Women's Day just says, stop, pause, think, assess. What can you do to accelerate? And have you painted things into a certain box that you think that that's how life is and that's how it goes? But have you actually checked that, right, with a diverse area of your team, right, to actually see, does that make sense still, to you as a person or not? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
I think that's quite an important point, actually, that pausing to stop and reflect is a big discussion point in my team. My management team at the minute is we've got a wide range of ages across the service line. So we talk a lot about the different generations and how they think, and that is sort of leading to discussions about how we have to change our style of leadership and management, and making sure, because Gen Z think differently to millennial, think differently to boomers, and it's been a really interesting topic of conversation. We have to address things about making sure we have different forms of communication, because everybody communicates differently these days across that wide age range as well. So yeah, I think you're right. It's that pause, take a moment to reflect, ask yourself the question, is there anything I can be doing a bit different?
We're talking about, the energy industry and, the importance of diversity, because it's not just about, kind of ticking a box. This is actually, fundamental to our success, as people who are trying to, kind of build a new way of, providing energy, a new way of basically looking at the world. Who wants to even start there?
I'll go.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So for me, it was dogged determination.
Right, that helps too.
Right.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah.
Actually.
So it was just, I knew I could, and so I did. And it was. So when I went on ships, I think I was 20 years old. I was on ships 6 months on to 2 months off, so a little bit of a different rotation, and male dominated. But it was, I can, and so I will. And so I think to get that job on ships, I showed up every week, 1 day a week, to the person who would place people on the vessels, and just was persistent, because I knew I could do it and I wanted to do it, and so I showed up. As I've grown older in my career or matured in it, now I've had to hold on to my self-confidence. Right, so it's a little bit, now the dogged determination isn't there, because I'm not quite sure necessarily what the company will ask me to do next. So my next step isn't assured. I'm not sort of, I wasn't lucky enough to be one of those people to say, well, one day I wish to be CEO of, the Boeing company, and that is what I shall do, right? So I don't, but I do want to be fulfilled, and I want to enjoy my next step, etc. But then as you go into these next steps, they're scary. So you have to take that dogged determination, and then you have to take that self-confidence, and you take it day by day, and you just say, I'm going to rock up, and I know that I can do this because I've done it before, and I need to get comfortable in the space, and I know I can do it again. And that's all that it is, dogged determination. Fugro's vision, right, which is to create a safe and livable world, that's exactly how we're going to achieve that vision, right, is dogged determination. Because you don't just get it because you dream about it and the next day it arrives. You just have to rock up every day and keep plugging at it. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. It's particularly on the self-confidence bit, because starting out in the offshore industry, then it's new, and we've got a desire to learn. And we always had really good team members and mentors offshore. So as long as you kind of show that desire and willingness to learn and be interested, show interest, then you'll find that there's a lot of people there that are willing to help you along the way. And then you're moving into sort of more leadership roles or management roles, then you add a little bit of a self-confidence dip as well, because it's totally different from a technical environment. And then you're involved more in people management, which presents a whole different challenge, because we're all different as individuals, and people think differently and act differently in different situations. So again, it's about using your experience from the past, but yeah, trying to navigate your way through that as well.
Very good. Well, we've heard it here first. Dogged determination and overcome. Make sure you hold on to that sense of self-confidence, because there are people who will help. Nicola, Linda, thank you ever so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. And happy International Women's Day to you. If you want to hear more Energy Voice out loud, sign up on your podcast platform of choice. Alternatively, you can listen to Fugro's own podcast, Planet Beyond, also available on those same platforms.